The polished mahogany table gleamed like a mirror under the soft light of the Wheeler mansion's chandelier. The faint scent of imported wood polish mixed with the sterile aroma of wealth, expensive, cold, and proud. Harrison Wheeler, a man whose tailored suit seemed almost tighter than his smile, sat at the head of the table, his posture screaming authority. His silver cufflinks glinted as he leaned forward, fingers tapping impatiently against the table. Across from him sat a young woman in a simple white blouse and neatly pressed jeans, a sharp contrast to the room's gold-framed paintings and Italian decor. Her name was Kesha Williams, 24 years old, calm, composed, and radiating a quiet confidence that didn't belong to her surroundings. "Look," Harrison began, his tone polite enough to pass as civil but laced with that subtle arrogance that money often breeds. "I don't want to sound prejudiced, but are you sure you can handle difficult children?" The words lingered in the air like smoke. Kesha didn't flinch. She'd heard far worse. Her back straightened in the expensive Italian leather chair, and she smiled, not the forced smile of someone desperate for approval, but one born from quiet endurance. "I have experience with children in traumatic situations, Mr. Wheeler," she replied softly. "It's what I've studied for, and it's exactly what I need to continue paying for my degree." Her voice was even, professional, but inside she was studying him. The man sitting across from her was more than a potential employer. He was a case study wrapped in arrogance, and she already knew more about him than he could imagine. For 3 sleepless nights, Kesha had researched Harrison Wheeler. He was a millionaire real estate mogul who had built an empire on charm and manipulation, and recently, on a very public unraveling. His wife had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving him to raise 6 daughters alone. Since then, his household had become infamous among domestic agencies. 101 nannies in 6 months. Each one leaving broken, exhausted, or terrified. The last one had fled screaming that the Wheeler girls were little devils. 6 daughters, Harrison sighed dramatically, rubbing his temples as if even the mention of them gave him a headache. "You understand, we're not talking about ordinary children here. We're talking about chaos. A veritable domestic hell." From upstairs came the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, followed by high-pitched laughter that sounded more like battle cries than giggles. Harrison grimaced, embarrassed but trying to appear composed. Kesha didn't react. She simply made a mental note, unstructured behavior, likely unaddressed grief, attention-seeking pattern. "I'll be blunt," Harrison said finally, leaning forward. "You seem like a well-educated girl, but this isn't the place for people like you. It's stressful, the expectations are high, and the pay isn't exactly Harvard level." That last word, Harvard, was spoken with a smug smirk, the kind men like him use when they think they're being funny. Kesha's eyes glimmered. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a test, not of employment, but of character. "Mr. Wheeler," she said after a brief pause. "I accept the job. And I can guarantee your daughters won't make me run away." Her tone sharpened slightly. "In fact, I have a feeling that in the end, you'll be the one asking me to stay." Harrison chuckled, the kind of laugh that meant he didn't believe a word she said. "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp," he said, picking up a pen. "Salary's $3,000 a month. No benefits. Do you accept, or would you like to think about it?" "I accept," Kesha said, shaking his hand firmly. "But I have one condition." Harrison's eyebrows rose. "A condition?" "I want complete freedom to deal with the children my way," she said. "No interference, no questions about my methods." He hesitated. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he clearly underestimated. But something about her eyes made him nod. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." As Kesha walked through the long marble hallway toward the exit, she noticed everything, the crayon marks on the walls, the once beautiful Persian rugs now stained with juice and paint, the expensive paintings hanging crookedly. The Wheeler mansion looked perfect from the outside, but inside, it was crumbling. And then, as she passed the study, she heard his voice. Harrison was on the phone. "No, Mom," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "She's just temporary. A girl from the suburbs. You know how it is. She'll last maybe 2 days, a week tops. Then we'll hire a real professional." Kesha paused at the door, her expression unreadable. She'd expected arrogance. She hadn't expected contempt. But that was fine. She had just confirmed everything she needed to know. If Harrison Wheeler thought he'd hired another desperate maid, he was wrong. What he'd done was invite into his mansion a storm wearing a smile, a woman who understood pain better than he ever could, and who was about to turn his picture-perfect world upside down. The next morning dawned crisp and golden, sunlight spilling across the sprawling front lawn of the Wheeler estate. Kesha arrived exactly at 7. She wore the same simple white t-shirt, clean jeans, and comfortable sneakers. Her backpack seemed light, but inside it was more than cleaning supplies. There was a small notebook, a digital recorder, and a heart full of purpose. When Harrison opened the door, he looked surprised. "I thought you weren't coming," he said, still in his robe, a faint trace of whiskey from last night lingering in the air. "The last nanny said that too. You'll understand soon enough." Behind him, on the wide staircase, stood 6 little figures, all watching her like soldiers awaiting an enemy. Madison, 12, the eldest, with eyes far too old for her age. The twins, Ashley and Amanda, 8, whispering to each other like conspirators. The younger girls, Sophia, Emma, and little Grace, huddled together at the bottom, curious but wary. "Girls," Harrison said with forced cheer. "This is, what's your name again?" "Kesha," she replied calmly. "Right. Kesha will be cleaning the house today." He smirked. "We'll see how long she lasts." He grabbed his car keys and glanced at her. "I've got a meeting with some Japanese investors. You wouldn't understand, business stuff." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it, as if she were too small to comprehend his world. Kesha smiled politely. "Have a good meeting, Mr. Wheeler." When the front door closed, the air in the mansion changed. The 6 girls remained silent, staring at her like predators sizing up prey. Madison took the lead, descending the stairs with authority far beyond her years. "Listen here, you," she said firmly. "We don't want you here. We don't want anyone here. So please, leave before we make you leave." Kesha crouched slightly, bringing herself to Madison's eye level. "I understand," she said softly. "You lost your mom. And now everyone who walks in here tries to replace her. That must be awful." For the first time, Madison's mask cracked. The sharpness in her eyes faltered. "You don't know anything about us," she snapped, but her voice trembled. "I know you made 101 adults give up in 6 months, Kesha replied, standing again. "That takes intelligence, coordination, and a lot of creativity. I'm impressed." The other girls looked at each other, confused. No adult had ever praised their defiance before. Kesha didn't tell them she had once been just like them, a frightened child hiding behind rebellion. Or that she'd lived in 7 foster homes before someone finally saw her for who she really was. She just smiled, picked up a broom, and began to clean. But her eyes, sharp and perceptive, missed nothing. She noticed the family portraits, every one featuring their late mother, always placed where the children couldn't escape her memory. She saw the unopened mail on the desk, medical bills, legal notices. Harrison Wheeler, the millionaire, was in deep debt. And when the landline rang, she heard his voice again from the study. "Look, Mom, this girl from the suburbs costs a third of a real nanny. It's temporary. Those kids will have her running in 2 days." Kesha smiled faintly. So that's it, she thought. The mighty Harrison Wheeler is broke. She folded laundry, cooked lunch, and quietly observed each daughter, mapping their traumas, their fears, their unspoken grief. By sunset, the mansion looked cleaner than it had in months. When Harrison returned, he paused, surprised. "Wow," he said sarcastically. "You survived the first day. That's a record." "The girls were very cooperative," Kesha replied calmly. He frowned. "Really?" "Yes. By the way, I noticed some medical bills on your desk. Would you like me to organize them?" His expression hardened instantly. "That's none of your business. You're here to clean, not snoop." "Of course," she said, lowering her gaze. But inside, she was smiling. Every reaction is data, she thought. Every word, a confession. That night, on the bus ride home, Kesha opened her small notebook and began to write. Her handwriting was neat and deliberate. Financial instability confirmed. Emotional neglect observed. Possible psychological trauma in minors. Racial bias indicators present. Then she added the final line. Subject unaware that he is part of an academic case study approved by the University Ethics Committee. Because Kesha Williams wasn't a maid. She was a master's student in child psychology, and Harrison Wheeler had just become her most valuable research subject. Weeks passed, and something extraordinary happened inside the Wheeler mansion. The once chaotic halls grew quiet. The girls began to laugh, not mockingly, but joyfully. Madison, the eldest, started doing her homework again. The twins stopped their pranks and began baking cookies with Kesha. Even little Grace, who hadn't spoken since her mother's death, whispered her first word in 2 years, "Mama." And she said it while hugging Kesha. When Harrison finally noticed, it was too late. The house he'd filled with bitterness had been reborn through love he didn't understand. He watched in disbelief as his daughters ran into Kesha's arms, their eyes filled with the kind of warmth he thought money could buy. One night, Harrison confronted her. "What did you do to them?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Kesha looked up from helping Grace with a bedtime story. "I didn't do anything to them, Mr. Wheeler," she said softly. "I just listened. Something you forgot how to do." Her words hit harder than any insult could. In that moment, Harrison realized the truth. The problem had never been his daughters, or the nannies, or even the chaos. It had been him. His grief had poisoned everything he touched. The next morning, he called her into his office. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "And a promotion, if you'll stay." Kesha smiled gently. "I can't. My research is complete." He blinked. "Research?" She handed him a small folder. Inside were pages of notes, his household, his behavior, his children's progress. "I'm studying post-trauma recovery in children and parents," she explained. "You were my case study. But what I found here was more than research. It was proof that even the most broken families can heal, if they remember how to love." For the first time in years, Harrison Wheeler cried. As she walked out of the mansion for the last time, 6 little girls ran after her, hugging her tightly. "Don't go," they pleaded. Kesha knelt and smiled. "I'll always be with you," she said, touching her heart. "And now, you have your father back." When she left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, filled with hope, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. Harrison stood by the window, watching her walk down the driveway. He whispered to himself, "I fired 101 nannies, but one woman changed everything." Moral: it doesn't take wealth, status, or power to heal a family, only patience, understanding, and love. Red Heart.